If any of you here are shocked that ransomware is one of the greatest challenges in cybersecurity, you've probably spent the week at the wrong conference. Our fight against ransomware, or more generally, cybercrime, requires all of us to work together. I have had the pleasure of working closely with the National Cybercrime Coordination Center, or NC3, because we like our acronyms, unit of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Police forces around the world are a key component of fighting cybercrime, but we need to know what they need and what they can do for us. And both domestically and internationally, we can work with the police to improve the cyber landscape. It is my great pleasure to introduce to you Chris Lynam, Director General of the NC3.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. A little about myself. I'm Chris Lynam from Ottawa, about 2 hours west of here, but a trip to Montreal is always a treat, so sincere thanks to the FIRST program committee for allowing me to take part in this special event and speak firsthand with all of you experts here today. I will do the typical Canadian thing, and I'll apologize on behalf of our country for the bad air quality of the smoke that maybe some of you saw this week. It wasn't my fault, but hopefully it didn't impact your stay in this marvelous city too much. Before I begin, I wanted to say a sincere thanks to all the people out there who play a key role keeping our informational communication technology safe and secure, and to all those who have a role in responding when something gets attacked. From where I sit and what I see on a daily basis, it has never been harder to be in these type of roles. We have never asked more of those on the cyber front lines. So to all those cyber first responders out there, you have my admiration and thanks. So a little about my current role. I'm the Director General at the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and I'm responsible for two key national police services. One being the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre, known as the CAFC, and the other is the National Cybercrime Coordination Centre, known as the NC3 that was mentioned. I'm mainly going to talk about the NC3 and what we do to fight cybercrime and how we got here. I'll also expand a bit on what we mean when we say National Police Service, because national is the operative word, and it's extremely important to our mandate. I'd also like to take a step back and give you a short history on the role of Canadian police in fighting cybercrime. And for cybercrime, it's not a long historical track for police in Canada. The RCMP, folks that didn't know, just celebrated its 150th anniversary. No, the history of cybercrime doesn't go back that far. It goes back about 10 to 12 years. So the recap shouldn't take long, and you'll see why I go there. There we go. So it's important context. It's a story that we're trying to increasingly tell like-minded partners and allies who also play a key role in fighting cybercrime. It's a story we like to tell because we're proud of the progress we've made, but we realize we still have a long way to go. But highlighting our win successes in this field is key because there continues to be a great deal of misperception about the role of law enforcement in cyber incident response, not only in Canada, but also around the world. Like many of the cyber-related challenges we face in today's world, how law enforcement fits into the cyber continuum is part of a rapidly evolving global challenge. For example, it should not be seen as a potential add-on or a component that would slow down a victim's most critical response elements, like technical mitigation and getting back to business. For us, it's quite the opposite. We feel that police can and should work in tandem and help enable other key roles in incident response. In some cases, hopefully many, we can collaborate and work together. Well before the boom happens, as in before data has been exfiltrated, the ransom's been paid, or something even more catastrophic. Essentially, we are looking to improve our efforts in the prevention space in an effort to combat and reduce cybercrime. I know that you are well aware of the complexities engagement in the protection and prevention space. In fact, many of you here this week are actively working with your clients and partners in ways that make active contributions to reducing the negative impacts that come from the dark side of cyber. We too are actively working to ensure that, as the law enforcement community are placed alongside you and the players and the rest of the players is understood. It is exactly this point, let's call it the integrated role of police in cyber incident response that is a key message that I want to leave with you today. I hope it resonates, and it's something that I'll circle back as well. First, allow me to take a step back and briefly outline how the role of Canadian police in cyber incident response has evolved over the past decade or so. I'm going to focus on the police side of things because I think it will shed light on a newer and evolving element of incident response for police. Now, my policy manager at the NC3 also candidly informed me that I will not out-cyber this audience, so I should perhaps pick a slightly different lane and area of focus. He's worked for me for a long time, so he's comfortable in telling me that. But he has a point. I humbly agree with him on this point that I will absolutely not out-cyber this group, and it's not lost on me that I'm surrounded by cyber incident response and information security experts, which again is an amazing opportunity for me and the RCMP to be here today. But by focusing on the role of police and what I call the human element in cyber, then I think we'll definitely find some common ground. Because in broad strokes, we all share a very similar mandate. We are all doing what we can to prevent and reduce harms for victims, which is another theme that I'll touch on again. But the police role is not limited to arrests and handcuffs. We are not going to arrest our way out of this. So, about the brief history of Canadian police in this space. Our role in cyber incident response started roughly in about 2010, give or take a couple of years. At that time, the RCMP was inundated with digital evidence, and we continue to be, across all criminal investigations. So we had a pretty good handle on the role of digital forensics. We also built up important capacity and partnerships to combat certain related online crimes, such as online child exploitation. But fighting cybercrime at the time, or what some called pure cybercrime and what others called cyber-dependent crime, continued to be a little murky. At that time, we were really not talking about ransomware groups, DDoS attacks, cybercrime as a service, and other upstream components of cyber-based threats. The talks were more modest and exploratory, along the lines of what exactly is cybercrime, where does it fit into our criminal code, what exactly is our role here, and what fundamental action do we need to advance the role of police? Obviously, things have evolved, and for the better. Law enforcement discussions on different ransomware variants, administrators, affiliates, victim targets, and evolving threats are now daily. And we've built up a unique lens on these issues through our work and successful operations, and most notably through a collaboration with partners inside and outside of policing. But around 2010, that wasn't the case. And the Canadian law enforcement knew that transformational changes were needed and long overdue. At first, the role of police matured more organically, and then more so at a strategic level. We leveraged partners through the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police and federal partners under Canada's cyber security strategy to rally around this issue and make a strong case for more policing capacity and capabilities to fight cybercrime. We also focused with an increasing number of data breaches. We were also faced with an increasing number of data breaches and network intrusions in Canada that we couldn't ignore. We also began to consider other evolving dynamics to our society's dependence on cyber outside traditional information technology, engaging with partners representing the operational technology space. In this environment, the attacks we were seeing seemed substantial at the time, and they were, of course, as each new data breach seemed to set a new record in scope, magnitude, and victim impact, such as the Heartbleed vulnerability in 2014, leading to an attack against the Canadian Revenue Agency, or the infamous Ashley Madison data breach in 2015. In hindsight, as you see on the slide there, these attacks now seem small in scale and complexity and impact compared to what we're facing in more recent years and continue to face. Eventually, Canada's policing network, capacity network to fight cybercrime began to grow and expand. The RCMP had its first federal investigative team in Ottawa around 2015, and then the Ontario Provincial Police formed a cybercrime team around the same time. And since that time, Toronto, Peel Region, Calgary, La Sûreté de Québec, le Service de Police de la Ville de Montréal, and others have formed strong and dedicated capacity. There's no one-size-fits-all for cybercrime investigative teams, but there's more coverage in Canada today than ever before, and we continue to work with police partners across Canada to share our knowledge and build up even more capacity. Today, we have more RCMP cybercrime investigative teams at the federal level and dedicated capacity within our provincial and major municipal partner jurisdictions. Again, not really the case in 2010. So now, during the trajectory in about 2015, Canadian police leaders recognized that we needed more investigative capacity, but that we equally needed to couple that effort with national coordination. It's a cliche and an overused analogy, but we really did need to connect the dots. Like any other country, cybercrime in Canada was never about one victim or one jurisdiction. It invariably required police services in Canada and abroad to mobilize to take a team sport approach. The National Cybercrime Coordination Center, a program at the RCMP that I oversee, was born from this simple principle that no single organization or sector can combat cybercrime alone, and that a centralized mechanism was required to zoom out, stitch things together at a national level, and connect and enable Canadian law enforcement on the international stage. From 2015 to 2018, the RCMP and its policing partners in Canada gradually made the case for the NC3, which received funding around 2018, and achieved its initial operating capability in 2020. Today, our program includes over 80 dedicated and passionate employees. We have regular members, sworn members of the RCMP, civilians, intelligence analysts, technical specialists, research and behavior experts, individuals from the private sector through Interchange Canada, among other fields and disciplines. We're also on track to reach full operating capability in 2024. This is a major milestone that will include a new public reporting system for victims of cybercrime and fraud in Canada, and new technical capabilities for Canadian police to share, analyze, and manage cybercrime data across jurisdictions. We're building on these new tools in an agile and iterative manner, and with our partners to ensure they meet our needs and enable us to keep pace with the threats we face. I also mentioned that the NC3 is a national police service. This term has significant meaning and is codified under the RCMP regulations. Essentially, we have the authority from the RCMP Commissioner to conduct our operational activities and provide services on a national scale to our Canadian police partners, both those within and outside RCMP jurisdiction. Of equal importance, we also have the authority to provide the same services to our international partners and in concert with the private sector. For cybercrime, it's really a non-starter if we cannot operate this way. So, the National Police Service designation is something we're very proud of, and we could not deliver our mandate without it. We also take diversity very seriously. Over 50% of the NC3 program identifies as female, which is significant given that gender gaps are often amplified in cybersecurity and IT fields. I always like to highlight this as our strength comes from our diversity and our passionate and dedicated workforce. It's definitely about the people and finding the right people. And without bragging too much, I'd like to highlight that we've had some operational successes. We receive about 1,500 requests for operational assistance from our police partners domestically and internationally on an annual basis. These requests can run the gamut and vary in complexity. Some are straightforward, and we may simply involve making connections at a national level, such as connecting indicators of compromise across separately reported events. Some are far more involved and long-running, such as supporting an international operational project with national coordination or augmenting an investigation with our intelligence analysis capabilities and specialized technical tools. All to say the demand is there, and there's no sign of it slowing down. Of note, about half our requests are international in nature too. We have a strong international presence at Europol's European Cybercrime Center, EC3. And yes, the name NC3 was inspired by that name and by the EC3 itself. We're a key part of EC3's Joint Cybercrime Action Task Force and sit side by side with international partners across member states in the EU and abroad. The operational gains from this partnership and alignment at the international level cannot be overstated. Through this network, Canadian law enforcement has made meaningful contributions to fighting ransomware and other prolific cybercrime threats on an international scale, contributing to arrests, charges, seized infrastructure, domain takedowns, and other successful outcomes. And some industry partners have taken notice. Some cybersecurity organizations have acknowledged the increased pressure from law enforcement in recent years to fight cybercrime and the positive impact it has had on deterring cybercrime activity, contributing to a reduction in ransomware payouts in some cases. I can't do everything justice in just one speech, but I thought I'd like to share some insight in some recent operations just to give you a sense of the depth and breadth of coordination involved and to highlight what's possible for the police role in cyber incident response, above and beyond efforts to arrest and charge bad actors in this space. You may have heard of this operation as it received quite a bit of national attention. It's called Operation Cookie Monster, a fun play on words about HTTP cookies. But again, I'm not going to out-cyber this group, so you probably get the pun that's involved there. The operation involved the takedown of Genesis Market. This was a well-known online cybercrime marketplace that included the sale of over 2 million stolen credentials, included bots and logs and cookies to bypass online authentication protocols and cause havoc to user accounts and sense information and facilitate many other cybercrimes. The operation was led by the FBI and culminated in a global day of action on April 4th of this year. In total, the operation included law enforcement partners from 18 countries and around 400 distinct police actions. The illegal service was shut down and infrastructure was seized. And Canada's role in this operation was not a mere footnote. In addition to the NC3's coordination role, 28 police services in total, as well as the Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunications Commission, the CRTC, took part in the operation across federal, provincial, and municipal levels in Canada. The unprecedented response for Canadian law enforcement involved 79 distinct police actions in total, including 9 arrests, 9 search warrants, and 61 cease and desist engagements. Now, I want to pause for a second and explain why the scope and scale of this police action is important for Canada and what these numbers mean too. First, the scope of this operation in Canada, again, 28 different police services working together, resulting in 79 police actions across the country. Remember when I mentioned our humble beginnings in around 2010? If we rewind to that point, then we are absolutely not at the table for this operation. We are not even a footnote, and we would simply be reading about the outcome of this operation in the media headlines, just like everyone else. This is important because Canadian law enforcement now has a very legitimate and relevant role in cyber incident response and fighting cybercrime. In other operations, we've been able to intervene in the early stages, notify victims directly, and prevent cybercrime in other less traditional ways. Last year, Canadian law enforcement participated in an FBI-led operation to disrupt the Hive ransomware group, which targeted more than 1,500 victims in 80 countries, including hospitals, healthcare systems, school districts, financial firms, and other critical infrastructure sectors. The FBI infiltrated the Hive network, hacked the hackers, so to speak, and they also obtained decryptor keys. We coordinated efforts with the FBI and our Canadian international partners, and in some cases helped get the decryption capability into the hands of the victims prior to them paying the ransom. 8 Canadian organizational victims in total successfully decrypted the Hive ransomware, and the estimated savings that they didn't have to pay out are in the millions, including the disruption of high ransomware demands in the $20 to $40 million range. Obviously, it's all come a very long way, but we, and by we I mean the police, still have much to do to get a better job of explaining our relevance to other key players in this space, like to you, of course, and advancing collective actions so that we can better integrate our responses to cybercrime and further reduce harm to victims. On that point about reducing harm, this is another theme that stands out with Cookie Monster, the Cookie Monster operational example, and something worth expanding on a bit. As you probably noticed for the Genesis Market takedown, the bulk of the police actions were not focused on arrests and charges. Now, make no mistake, investigations and taking paths to arrests and charges and convictions remains a core and fundamental law enforcement objective. We will always aim to hold the most prolific threat actors and top targets accountable where possible. And in a Canadian context, we've seen an uptick in arrests, charges, and convictions in cybercrime over recent years. And we're continuing to flex that muscle by investigating and disrupting threat actors in Canada and working with our international law enforcement partners to also do this globally. But again, we're not going to arrest our way out of cybercrime. It will never add up that way. It continues to be a crime that evolves in high volume and is an enduring crime that will always evolve. Today it's ransomware, which is the 21st century version of extortion. And tomorrow will be something else. Unlike the underlying code, cybercrime is not a binary challenge that will go from 1 to 0 someday. We all know it will also be here. And with the volume and magnitude of cybercrime and the level of victimization, the arrest path is not always practical, nor always the most effective approach. It's also not the only role or lane for police. This is where we must balance other harm reduction measures, like prevention, intervention, and disruption tactics. Operation Cookie Monster is a good example of this. It included 61 cease and desist engagements. Essentially, these were door knocks with individuals who were identified as having user accounts on Genesis Market. We may have been short on the grounds for laying charges at that time, but partners had enough to visit the individuals, issue warnings about their activity, convey the right messages to hopefully divert them on the right path. I realize this may seem like a non-traditional role for police, most notably in a cyber context, but it's an effective part of the toolkit and needs to happen more to increase the tempo against cybercrime and reduce harm to victims at a greater scale. If we can get to those low-level or junior cybercrime offenders, then they face less risk in becoming bigger and more prolific problems down the road. In a best-case scenario, you divert them into making the right cyber choices and choosing lawful occupations in the cyber ecosystem, whether in policing or another key role, which also helps longer term in addressing the cyber talent gap. All of this may sound a little too utopian, but we're learning from others in this space who have had success in the area, most notably our policing partners in the United Kingdom and the Netherlands. For the past decade, the Canadian police role has been largely focused on the pursuit of cybercriminals. This remains absolutely critical, but needs to be coupled with more prevention and other harm reduction measures to have greater effect. As we recently heard from a Dutch partner, prevention without pursuit is toothless, but pursuit without prevention is endless. I think that's very well said. I now want to talk a bit about how I think all of our response elements could come together. It's increasing what we're calling left of attack engagement between police, organizational victims, and other key players in cyber incident response, like CSIRTs, breach coaches, banks, insurance carriers, and of course all of you here today. For incident response, the different pathways that a cyber victim has to navigate is long and can be painstaking, sometimes to the point where a victim can feel like they're being re-victimized through the process. Despite the progress I mentioned, the role of Canadian police in cyber incident response continues to be developing. Victim reporting to police is historically low, hovering around 5 to 10%. And if an organizational victim is well equipped enough to have a cyber incident response plan, then the role of police is often secondary at best and non-existent at worst, which is often the case. Why is that? First, yes, many victims continue to have reputational concerns about including police and potentially going down a court process one day. And we're doing our best, albeit slowly, to address those misperceptions and highlight how things actually unfold. Many may also give primacy to cybersecurity and technical aspects of incident response, and I would agree this should take full primacy. Organizations need to have strong plans in place to mitigate, remediate, shore up defenses, and get back to business as soon as feasible. For ransomware, victims may feel that they've done something wrong if they choose to pay a ransom, and as such may put the wall up on police involvement. Of course, as a police agency, we will always discourage the payment of ransomware payments. We have evidence that the bad guys don't give you your keys back or delete your stolen data, and paying a ransom puts a perpetual target on your back in many ways. We also know that many companies have to navigate some complexities around sanctions for certain ransomware groups too. But setting aside all of that, whether or not a victim chooses to pay a ransom, the victim is still a victim, and police will work with them. We'll do so in a way that respects the core elements of incident response too. We're not looking to cart away all your servers and data and leave you out of business for longer stretches. We're focused in timely coordination and access to key digital artifacts, such as suspect IOCs, email addresses, monikers, the ransom note, Bitcoin transactions, and activity logs. Details that will help us piece things together. The turnaround time for police action is often not immediate, of course. It's complex and long-running, but victim reporting does matter. Over time, it all contributes to successful outcomes and makes this environment much harder for cybercriminals, such as going after infrastructure or freezing and recovering victim funds where possible. We also realize we need to improve reciprocal models with victims and others involved in incident response, such as two-way information sharing on meaningful and actionable intelligence. We're having active discussions with partners on these issues and welcome more partners and ideas to ensure that working with police is a two-way street. So about that left of attack term. All of the above is likely ineffective, if not impossible, if we wait for the house to be on fire for a police relationship to form with the victim, or for an interaction to take place between police and many other experts involved in cyber incident response, including you. We need joined up engagement interaction to start much earlier. Plan, test, repeat. Build that trust and confidence over time amongst all of us. We need your help here, and we think that the relationship can be reciprocal. We would love our partners in incident response to consider encouraging more victims to work with police and to help us in disarming many misperceptions that continue to exist. We want to work with you folks, the experts in this space, to achieve the best integration possible. And as the evolution continues, we need to remain connected with you to remain on that cutting edge. So to wrap up, I hope that I've left you today with a little more confidence and a more broader perspective about the role of police and how we play to help fight cybercrime. And in closing, a very sincere thank you again to the FIRST Committee and this conference. And I also want to quickly reiterate the thank you that I gave at the start, particularly to all those who play a role in keeping our IT systems safe and responding when things go boom. As I said, this is a really tough, demanding job that can put a toll on people and their mental health. We are facing human adversaries who are relentless in their efforts, and I don't see the work you do to counter them becoming easier anytime soon. If you are struggling, please reach out to someone. You're not alone. There are other cyber first responders out there who are feeling the same pressures. Okay, please look after each other. Finally, it's fitting that the first conference theme is about empowering communities. At the RCMP, we just celebrated, as I mentioned, our 150th anniversary, which highlighted the RCMP's goal to keep our communities safe. So, on behalf of the RCMP and our Canadian policing partners, we look forward to working more closely with all of you to protect our cyber communities in new and innovative ways. Thank you very much. And I'm happy to take questions as well.
There are microphones if anyone has questions. Hi.
Where are we at? Oh, yeah, hi.
Yes. Not really a question, but just a comment. I'm from Interpol, by the way.
Okay.
So we are like the minority here representing law enforcement. I really like what you mentioned about, having international cooperation and bringing in the necessary stakeholders with the right expertise will definitely go a long way in combating cybercrime, which is very important for law enforcement. So I just wanted to add that Interpol, representing our 195 member countries' law enforcement, we are proposing to establish a special interest group looking at how law enforcement and the CERT community can collaborate more closely together. Earlier this week, we have had a very successful discussion at one of the BOF talks conducted by myself. And we are at our final stages of finalizing the proposal, and hopefully that proposal will be approved by the first board of directors. And if all goes well, then probably the next time we all meet together in Fukuoka, that will be then our first in-person meeting as a special interest group, really looking at how law enforcement and CERT can work together to make cyberspace safer. That's all I wanted to comment.
No, that's great, and it's great. That's great to hear. Interpol is another key partner. I mentioned I talked about that team sport approach. We often talk about having a Team Canada approach here in Canada about law enforcement and incident response folks coming together. But it's really we need a team world approach to really figure out how to come together as countries and as many partners as possible to make people safe, but also go after the bad threat actors. So thank you.
Thank you.
So I look at some of the ransomware market dynamics, and I'm really interested in the interventions that you do. In particular, I'd love to see all of them over time and see some of the effects on some of the data that I collect. Is there a way I can easily see all the interventions that happened in the past and what date they occurred on from your website or from your team?
I would say probably at the exact time, no, but it might be worth a conversation after. I don't know what organization you're representing, but increasingly, and part of it here in Canada, we're looking increasingly at putting more sort of relatively anonymized data online. So in an open data project, we're doing it for individual. We'll be doing it very shortly for individual sort of cybercrime attacks. But we want to look at those. So yeah, it is really key to understand sort of across the ecosystem what's going on. We think we get a snapshot here in Canada. I mentioned that only that 5 to 10% reporting, but we've been able to map out and see where some groups, it's spiking over a quarter. We saw that interestingly with Conti in the first quarter of 2022, and then the invasion happened, and then Conti dissolved, and that dropped off, and then we saw Hive spike at another point. So it is important to see what's happening across the ecosphere. So yeah, happy to have a conversation.
I mean, I understand the sensitivity around time and so on, but you made the Cookie Monster, for example, operation public on your website. Even that public announcement that it had occurred is like useful enough for what we're doing.
Yeah, no, that's great.
Thanks.
Yeah, great. Okay.
Hi, Chris. I know that we as national CSIRTs get information and we put links together, but we're often not able to share that information with police just because we want to make sure that we are there as responders. And we try to encourage people to share because, while we may link IP addresses together in stories, if we can't share that information, those linkages sometimes lead to international police forces making linkages and figuring out how to arrest people. What kind of efforts can you help us to encourage people to get the message out of the role of police and to at least encourage them to report the same information to police forces that report to us?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think I'd sort of respond in two ways. One, when I talked about sort of help build those relationships or encourage building those relationships beforehand, like have it built into instant response plans. Like I mentioned how we regularly now will cold call a victim and say, hey, like, I don't know if you knew, but you're being attacked right now, like unplug. And you can imagine just getting a call out of the blue from the police. Like that sometimes is like, there's a whole bunch of different variations that happen of like, they think we're scamming them, one thing. But so to me, I would say, okay, maybe you, from a victim perspective, you're not really interested in maybe, having that full cooperation, but maybe having in your incident response plan that like who the police might call you to tell that you're a victim and build in. So it's sort of having those discussions ahead of time. And then I think on like the CSIRT side of thing is figuring out new ways to work together. And what I would say is, I talked about a lot of the focus was on that pursuit and arrest and charges and handcuffs. There's a whole bunch of more effort now around disruption. And sometimes if we could look at doing, we know that's going to be the primary way of doing something that won't ever lead to arrests or charges. Maybe that changes the information sharing dynamic between a bunch of folks, including the CSIRT community.
Getting that message out there may be helpful because often people say, why do I report this? Because they're not going to do anything anyways. So having that understanding that they may not help you, but they may globally be able to go after the victim would be somehow great messaging for police forces.
Yeah, absolutely. And like we try and put much out, but as much as we can out. But absolutely, yeah. If there's avenues and like coming and speaking at venues like here is exactly that. We want to sort of share some information so that you go out in your daily interaction and go, you know what, I kind of heard a different story of how police actually operate. If you're talking to the victim or part of whatever. And that way, that can change the narrative, and it starts with those small incremental discussions. So
thank you.
Okay. Okay, I think that looks like it.